Our second self-reg myth, this idea that some people hold that if kids misbehave, they should be held accountable. So self-reg means going too soft on kids. So the perception is we're going too soft by using self-reg because it's not holding those kids accountable.
So, um, one of the most interesting things about the behaviorists, and here I'm talking about the real hardcore behaviorists, even they said, be careful when they talked about punishment and reward. They were actually very, very apprehensive about punishment. I understand why people would have that as an anxiety or as a concern. But really, what we're saying is look for the signs of stress behavior, and when you see them, see what happens when you reduce those stresses, when you go through the steps of self-reg.
So, and I think one of the things people that always strikes me is when people feel that way, they're usually very strong justice people, which is a
Yes.
good thing, right? I'm happy that I'm Libra, so I have that sense in me as well. But it's a understanding that is actually the idea of thinking that we're treating some kids or going too easy on kids. There's this pro-social stress, right? That we're
That's good.
not being fair, or that we might be producing not good moral citizens. That's a stressor on folks as well. That's part of the reason for the resistance.
I had that as an experience just the other day. I was giving that talk, remember, in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were doing Q&A afterwards, and one of the questions that came up was this mom asking me about, she's very concerned, exactly what you just described. And, that this was too permissive, that children need discipline, and so on and so on. But here's what I found most interesting about it, that when she started to talk, even before she'd said anything, I kind of knew where it was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And the stress in her voice was really, it was palpable. And, I couldn't help but wonder what were the anxieties that were behind all this. And I was thinking when I was coming home from that night, quite often we can talk about, why it's important to set limits, and self-reg is not about removing that. But I was wondering if ultimately one of the key aspects of responding to this question is to talk about personal self-reg.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's such a big piece of it, and
I do
understanding
too.
that. I had a story yesterday. So I was in an early childhood program, and there was this little guy. I was looking at a whole bunch of things, but I was particularly watching this one little guy who they had,
Is this the one you told me about?
this is the one I told you about, and he had all sorts of things going on. 4 years old, soon to be going to kindergarten the next year. Would hit, would fight. In fact, while I was there, he spit at a teacher. He would fight, got lots of arguing, would sort of have these meltdowns. There was all sorts of things going on with this little guy, but he was also sweet. This little guy moved me so much. And the people that were around him, I have to tell you, most of them, some of them, I could sense situations of seeing a bad kid. Most of them realized this was an overstressed kid, right? And he had all the signs. I mean, you could see even the physical signs of what was going on here. But what was neat for me was how quickly I turned it around. And I think, and that's not anything special about me. It was actually looking at it through a self-reg lens. So what happened, okay? There's two little boys, and they're having a game of Frisbee. And so this one little boy and another little boy, and apparently that was even a big deal, that they were able to sort of play this to a certain extent, And so the little boy I'm talking about, very physical boy, definitely needed to physically move, like the rough and tumble stuff. He throws the Frisbee and whips it off at the other the little fellows. So I'll just say the other little guy's name is John. So he whips it off and accidentally hits John, okay? The little boy John bowls over and he's like wailing, right? And so what happens to the other little fellow, and I'll call him Sam. Okay, so Sam storms away, and he grabs the Frisbee and he whips it, and then he, and the early childhood educators trying to get in, kind of get involved and protect it from actually becoming escalating. And then he goes up onto the playground equipment. And I'm just sitting watching all this. It happens very quickly. And he goes up on the playground equipment and stands at the very top of it and goes like this, and starts hitting everything and goes, and this little girl tries to come up, and he gives her a look like this. Like, if you'd have seen that one moment, you'd have thought this wasn't a very nice kid, right? And so just thinking back to this idea of no accountability, Well, if I'd have come in with a self-control, I could have punished him. I could have asked for, time out. I scolded him, whatever it was I could have done, and it would have just escalated, right? Absolutely escalated. So what I did was self-reg instead.
Awesome.
So, and Stuart, it changed so quickly. This was a very verbal little guy. Even though he was only 4 years old, he could articulate very clearly. So he had a lot of language, and I had a little bit of a relationship with him already. Anyway, he goes inside this tunnel, right, which of course we know is him trying to turn off all the sensory stuff on the outside. And he looks at me, and I sit fairly close to him, and I said to him, are you okay? And he said, well, he shouldn't have cried. He starts kind of yelling. He shouldn't have cried. He's just going to cry. It was just an accident. I said, I know it was an accident. He said, well, why was he crying? And I said, because I think he got hurt. But he said, and it took him a minute, and I could watch. I saw the shift, that the what is it, the ergotropic, the shift that you always talk about, and the big wide eyes. I mean, this all happened so quickly, and I said to him, I could see he believed me that I knew it was an accident. And so you know what he does? He crawls out of the little orange tube, and he goes over to the picnic table, and I'm trying to figure out where he's going. I think he's going to find the little boy. And he comes back with this clipboard with incidents reports and hands it to me and says, can you write it here? And there was no incident report. Like, everybody knew it was an accident, right? And I said, can you write it here that it was an accident? And I said, I don't need to. I know it was an accident, right? And I said, but now we need to go make sure the other little boy is okay. Right? And so then, fascinating, he comes out like this happened quickly. I shifted him quickly.
That's a great story.
And so we walk over to the other little boy, but he goes up to the little boy, and instead of saying, are you okay, which is always what I teach Sienna, that's where we start, right? He says, I'm sorry, because that's what he's been trained to do. But he did that on his own. I didn't ask him to do that. And then I helped him by saying, and now can you check that he's okay? And he did. And literally it was all over. So, it's fascinating to me because how I was able to shift this kid so quickly, and I was so glad the others had seen it. And did he take accountability? Like, I didn't need to do it for him. He did it for himself. Once he felt safe.
It's a huge story.
And once all I did was help him manage the strong emotion, the fear, the worry, like he just instantly went into protect mode, right? And that's that. I mean, this is not about kids not being good moral citizens. They will come back online and they will take care of what they need to, and then you can mentor them through that if they need to. But the accountability does come. It just comes in a different way.
So it's a huge story. One of the things that we emphasize over and over is asking why and why now. And I remember in one of my early sessions with Stanley, we were talking about how for a lot of young children, they have very poor body awareness. And so they may be clumsy, or they may not get distances, or they can't control the force of what they do. And it looks like, say, they're hitting someone, when in fact that wasn't what they wanted to do at all, but they haven't got that kind of, that fine motor control yet. But unfortunately, they get yelled at. And your story is a story about how quickly, you said 4 years old, and this pattern has now become entrenched. And here's this little boy who is still fighting that identification that's been thrust on him. Please, will you sign this on the... He doesn't want that label. But how much longer does he have before that label's become stuck and it's internalized?
Yeah.
And what a tragic story, right?
Absolutely. And that's where it's all about how we respond.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what they do. It really doesn't. I mean, obviously we're hoping for the best, but it's all about our response. And and we can really help these, because this little guy had it within him to develop self-regulation. He just needed somebody to help him get that blue brain back online.
They all do.
And and it was there.
That's a great story. Love it.
And he was a great kid too. So, and they were a great little center. I have to tell you, they were asking, why? What do I do? How do I respond? How can I see this differently? So I was very hopeful.